Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our reading of The Swiss Family Robinson. Today's chapter An Important Experiment. Let's get started. Early next morning, I got up without rousing any of the others, intending to pay a visit to the beach, where I had my doubts about the safety of my vessels on the open shore. The dogs were delighted when I descended the ladder and bounded to meet me. The cocks crowed and flapped their wings. Two pretty kids gamboled around, on with life and energy. The ass alone seemed disinclined to begin the day, and as I especially required his services, this was unfortunate. I put his morning dreams to flight, however, and harnessed him to the sledge. The cow, as she had not been milked, enjoyed the privilege of further repose, and with the rest of the family I left her dozing. My fears as to the safety of the boats were soon dispelled, for they were all right. Being in haste to return, the load I collected from their freight was but a light one, and the donkey willingly trotted home with it, he as well as I being uncommonly ready for breakfast. Approaching the tree, not a sound was to be heard, not a soul was to be seen, although it was broad day. Great was my good wife's surprise when, roused by the clatter and hullabaloo I made, she started up and became aware of the late hour. With much stretching and many yawns, the boys at last came tumbling down from the tree, rubbing their eyes and seeming but half awake. Ernest last as usual. Come, my boys, said I. This will never do. Your beds were too luxurious last night, I see. So now for prayers and breakfast, and then off to work. I must have our cargo landed in time to get the boats off with the next tide. By dint of downright hard work, we accomplished this, and I got on board with Fritz as soon as they were afloat. The rest turned homeward, but Jack lingered behind with such imploring looks that I could not resist taking him with me. My intention had been simply to take the vessels round to the harbour in Safety Bay, but the calm sea and fine weather tempted me to make another trip to the wreck. It took up more time than I expected, so that when on board, we could only make a further examination of the cargo, collect a few portable articles, and then avail ourselves of the sea breeze, which would fail us later in the evening. To Jack, the pleasure of hunting about in the hold was novel and charming, and very soon a tremendous rattling and clattering heralded his approach with a wheelbarrow. In the highest spirits at his good fortune in having found such a capital thing in which to bring home potatoes. He was followed by Fritz, whose news was still more important. He had found carefully packed and enclosed within partitions what appeared to be the separate parts of a pinnace, with rigging and fittings complete, even to a couple of small brass guns. This was a great discovery, and I hastened to see if the lad was right. Indeed, he was, but my pleasure was qualified by a sense of the arduous task it would be to put such a craft together so as to be fit for sea. For the present, we had barely time to get something to eat and hurry into the boat. where we collected our new acquisitions, namely a copper boiler, iron plates, tobacco graters, two grindstones, a small barrel of powder, and another of flints, two wheelbarrows besides Jack's, which he kept under his own especial care. As we drew near the shore, we were surprised to see a number of little figures ranged in a row along the water's edge, and apparently gazing fixedly at us. They seemed to wear dark coats and white waistcoats and stood quite still with their arms dropping by their sides, only every now and then one would extend them gently as though longing to embrace us. Ah, here at last come the pygmy inhabitants of the country to welcome us, cried I, laughing. "On, father!" exclaimed Jack. "I hope they are Lilliputians. I once read in a book about them, so there must be such people. You know, only these look rather too large." "You must be content to give up the Lilliputians and accept penguins, my dear Jack," said I. "We have not before seen them in such numbers, but Ernest knocked one down, if you remember, soon after we landed. They can neither fly nor run." We were gradually approaching the land as I spoke, and no sooner was the water shallow than out sprang Jack from his tub, and wading ashore took the unsuspecting birds by surprise, and with his stick laid half a dozen right and left, either stunned or dead at his feet. The rest escaped into the water, dived, and disappeared. As these penguins are disagreeable food on account of their strong, oily taste, I was sorry Jack had attacked them, but going to examine them when we landed, some of the fallen arose from their swoon and began solemnly to rattle away, upon which we caught them and tying their feet together with long grass, laid them on the sand to wait until we were ready to start. The three wheelbarrows then each received a load. The live penguins, seated gravely, were trundled along by Jack, and away we went at a great rate. The usual noise of our approach set the dogs barking furiously, but discovering us, they rushed forward with such forcible demonstrations of delight that poor little Jack, who, as it was, could scarcely manage his barrel, was fairly upset, penguins and all. This was too much for his patience, and it was absurd to see how he started up and cuffed them soundly for their boisterous behavior. This scene and the examination of our burdens caused great merriment, the tobacco grater and iron plates evidently puzzling everybody. I sent the boys to catch some of our geese and ducks and bade them fasten a penguin to each by the leg, thinking that it was worth while to try to tame them. My wife had exerted herself in our absence to provide a good store of potatoes and also of manioc root. I admired her industry, and little Fran said, "Ah, father, I wonder what you won't say when Miller and I give you some Indian corn and melons and pumpkins and cucumbers." Now, you little chatterbox, cried she, you have let out my secret. I was to have the pleasure of surprising your father when my plants were growing up. Ah, the poor disappointed little mother, said I. Never mind, I am trying to hear about it. Only do tell me, where did these seeds come from? Out of my magic bag, of course, replied she. And each time I have gone for potatoes, I have sown seeds in the ground which was dug up to get them. And I have planted potatoes also. But, continued she, I do not half like the appearance of those tobacco graters you have brought. Is it possible you are going to make snuff? Do pray let us make sure of abundance of food for our mouths before we think of our noses. Make your mind easy, my wife, said I. Please to treat my graters with respect. However, because they are to be the means of providing you with the first fresh bread you have seen this many a long day. What possible connection can there be between bread and tobacco graters? I cannot imagine what you mean. And to talk of bread where there are no ovens is only tantalizing. Ah, you must not expect real loaves, said I. But on these flat iron plates I can bake flat cakes or scones, which will be excellent bread. I mean to try at once what I can do with Ernest's roots. And first of all, I want you to make a nice strong canvas bag. This the mother willingly undertook to do, but she evidently had not much faith in my powers as a baker, and I saw her set on a good potful of potatoes before beginning to work, as though to make sure of a meal without depending on my bread. Spreading a piece of sailcloth on the ground, I summoned my boys to set to work. Each took a grater and a supply of round wash manioc root, and when all were seated round the cloth, once, twice, thrice, off, cried I, beginning to rub a root as hard as I could against the rough surface of my grater. My example was instantly followed by the whole party amid bursts of merriment, as each remarked the funny attitude and odd gestures of his neighbors, while vehemently rubbing, rasping, grating, and grinding down the roots allotted to him. No one was tempted by the look of the flour to stop and taste it, for in truth it looked much like wet sawdust. What is the good of pressing this, father? Inquired Ernest. It is in order to extract the sap, which contains poison. The dry pith is wholesome and nourishing. Still, I do not mean to taste my cakes until I have tried the effect on our fowls and the ape. By this time, our supply of roots having been reduced to damp powder, the canvas bag was filled with it, and tying it tightly up, I attempted to squeeze it, but soon found that mechanical aid was necessary in order to extract the moisture. My arrangements for this purpose were as follows. A strong straight beam was made flat on one side. Smooth planks were laid across two of the lower roots of our tree. On these we placed the sack. Above the sack, another plank, and over that the long beam. One end was passed under a root near the sack. The other projected far forward. and to that we attached all the heaviest weights we could think of, such as an anvil, iron bars, and masses of lead. The consequent pressure on the bag was enormous, and the sap flowed from it to the ground. Will this stuff keep any time? Inquired my wife, who came to see how we were getting on. Or must all this great big one be used at once? In that case, we shall have to spend the whole of tomorrow in baking cakes. Not at all, I replied. Once dry, the flour and barrels will keep fresh a long time. We shall use a great deal of this, however, as you shall see. Do you think we might begin now, father? Said Fritz. There does not seem the least moisture remaining. Certainly, said I, but I shall make only one cake today for an experiment. We must see how it agrees with Master Nips and the hens, before we set up a bakehouse in regular style. I took out a couple of handfuls of flour for this purpose, and with a stick loosened and stirred the remainder, which I intended should be again pressed, while an iron plate placed over a good fire was getting hot. I mixed the meal with water and a little salt, kneaded it round, and forming a thickish cake, laid it on the hot plate. When one side presently becoming a nice yellow brown color, it was turned and was quickly baked. It smelt so delicious that the boys quite envied the two hens and the monkey, who were selected as the subjects of this interesting experiment, and they silently watched them gobbling up the bits of cake I gave them. We left the fowls picking up the least crumb they could find of the questionable food, and assembled to enjoy our evening meal. The potatoes were, as usual, excellent. The penguin was really not so bad as I expected, although fishy in taste and very tough. Next morning, everyone expressed the tenderest concern as to the health of Nips and the hens. Lively pleasure was in every countenance when Jack, who ran first to make the visit inquiry, brought news of their perfect good health and spirits. No time was now to be lost, and the bread baking commenced in earnest. A large fire was kindled, the plates heated, the meal made into cakes, each of the boys busily preparing his own and watching the baking most eagerly. Mistakes occurred, of course. Some of the bread was burnt, some not done enough, but a pile of nice, tempting cakes was at length ready, and with plenty of good milk, we breakfasted right royally and in high spirits at our success. Soon after, while feeding the poultry with the fragments of the repast, I observed that the captive penguins were quite at ease among them, and as tame as the geese and ducks. Their bonds were therefore loosed, and they were left as free as the other fowls. And that would be all for today. I'll see you all next time. See ya!